Did you know that with just a single slider control in Final Cut Pro and zero expressions, you can do things like creating character lip sync animations, rigging characters, making this macOS dock animation, or this complex looking trippy triangle animation? Well, that's the power of the slider control in Apple Motion. Welcome to Motion with James, and today I will be showing you the basics of the slider control in Apple Motion and how to use it to make very powerful, very customizable plugins to use in Final Cut Pro. The slider control in Apple Motion has a very unique feature that makes it way more powerful than the one in Adobe After Effects and DaVinci Resolve Fusion, so be sure to keep watching to learn more about that. Simply put, the slider control, or the slider widget in Apple Motion's language, allows you to use one single slider to automate multiple parameters of different kinds across your whole project without any expressions. As a simple example, here's a single slider changing the height of the triangle while scaling up and rotating the star shape at the same time. Let's go through the steps of creating this plugin. Feel free to follow along. If you haven't already, go ahead and create a new Final Cut title project in Apple Motion, and we'll delete everything in the project pane so we can have a clean start. By the way, you can create slider controls in an effect or generator too. In case you're wondering what the difference is between a title and a generator, Dylan Bates has a fantastic video on that. I'll put a link in the corner up here and a description below if you want to watch it. First, let's create the basic rectangle shape. I'll come down here and click the Shape tool. If you don't see the rectangle, click the down arrow to find it. I'll come to the canvas and draw a rectangle. To make it look nicer, I'm going to go to Inspector and I'll disable the outline and enable fill. I'll pick a nice color. You don't need to do this step if you don't want to. Next, let's create the star shape. Come up here to Library and we'll click Shapes and come down here and click and drag the 5-sided star to our group. Or you can use any of the other shapes, it doesn't really matter. Once again, I'm going to give it a nice color and I'm going to move it over here. To control the height of the rectangle with a slider, we'll first need to find the height parameter. Select the rectangle layer, come here to Inspector if you're not in here already, come to Shape, and click on Geometry. Now come down here to Size, we'll expand the parameter, and here's the height parameter that we're looking for. Now come to the right side, click the down arrow, we'll come here to Add to Rake, create new rake, and we'll click Add to New Slider. You can see that we now have a slider under a rake, and the slider widget is controlling the rectangle height parameter. A rake is just what Apple Motion calls a group of widgets, and a widget is basically a macro control. The slider is a widget, and if we click on the rake layer, we can also come here to add a pop-up widget or two and a checkbox widget under the same rake. If you want to learn how to use a pop-up widget or how to make custom drop-down menus to use in Final Cut Pro, I have a video for that and I'll put the link in the description. Since we only need the slider widget right now, I'm going to delete the other widgets. I'll select our widget layer. Now, if we drag the slider, it won't do anything. And that's because we need to tell Apple Motion what to do at the start and the end of the slider. To set the start value, let's click on this little tag and change the height parameter to whatever you want the start value to be. I'll just leave it like this, and then we'll click on the other tag to set the end value. Say, this is how much I want the rectangle to grow. So you can see, we're now gradually changing the rectangle height with the slider based on the start and end values we specified. This is called interpolation. We'll do the same thing for the scale and rotation parameters of the start shape. Select the start shape, come to Inspector, and click on Properties. And here's the rotation parameter. So let's add that to our slider widget. We'll do the same for the scale parameter. And now if we select our slider widget, you can see the two new parameters we just added. Once again, we need to tell Apple Motion what the start and end values are for these parameters. We'll click on the first tag, and you can set your desired values for the scale and rotation parameters. I'm actually going to leave them as they are. But for the end tag, I'm going to increase the scale and rotate it a few times. And now, when we drag the slider, we're changing all three parameters at the same time. So that's the basic mechanism of the slider widget. But let's take a look at the options here. With range minimum and range maximum, you can actually modify the slider range. By default, it's 0 to 100. But if you set it to say 50 and 1000, you can see that now the slider goes from 50 to 1000. However, you notice how changing the range minimum and maximum has no effect on the 3 parameters the slider is controlling. The shapes behave exactly like before. This is because the slider value is purely there for display. You may ask, well, if it's just for show, why bother giving us the option to change the range? Well, that's because sometimes, depending on what the slider is modifying, 0 to 100 may not make sense. For example, here I have a simple slider that allows me to change a number from 1 to 10. Setting the range to 1 and 10 would make a lot of sense because the slider's value would match the number that's showing. If I put 2, it will show 2. And if I put 5, it will show 5. Back to our original project here, you can see that there's also an interpolation option for the slider. And if you click open it, you get to choose among constant, linear, and ease. With constant, the slider functions similarly to a drop-down menu. There is no interpolation. It will just jump from the start value to the end value, like that. With linear, Apple Motion will interpolate between 2 tags in a linear fashion. With ease, it would be more like an S-curve, making the animation look smoother. This option is useful if you're animating the slider. Now, let me introduce you to the unique feature in Apple Motion slider widget that puts it above the one in After Effects and DaVinci Resolve Fusion. Earlier, we used these 2 little tags to set the start value and the end value for the slider. These are called snapshot tags in Apple Motion, and the amazing thing is that you can actually move them to a different place on the slider, and also add as many of them as you want anywhere on the slider by double-clicking below it. Remember, you can save specific parameter values for each snapshot tag. So if I add a new one in the middle and change the shapes drastically, now when I move the slider, Apple Motion is interpolating among the 3 snapshot tags. This allows you to achieve a plethora of things with the slider in Apple Motion that can only be created via complex expressions in After Effects and DaVinci Resolve Fusion. As an example, this macOS dock animation I showed at the beginning of the video was done with just a single slider and a bunch of snapshot tags in Apple Motion. 0 expressions were needed. To do the same in After Effects, you have to use expressions. This video is already getting long, so I'm going to talk more in depth about the snapshot tags in another video, and I'll show you how I created that dock animation too. If you're interested in that, be sure to subscribe. To use the slider in Final Cut Pro, all you need to do is come to the right side of the slider widget, click the down arrow, and hit Publish. If you click on the project layer in the project pane, and come down here to the project tab, this shows you what you see in Final Cut Pro. You can double click on the slider to rename it. Finally, press Command S to save the project, put it in a category you want, give it a name, and hit Publish. Now, in Final Cut Pro, you'll be able to find it in Titles and Generators, under Titles, and under the category you saved it in. Mine is here. So this is the plugin. I'll drag it to the timeline. And over here, you can see the slider we just published. That's it for this video. Give it a like if you find it helpful, and don't forget to subscribe if you want to learn more about the snapshot tags I mentioned. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.